For our program today, we're going to move right in to our program, and I am excited about hearing what our presenter, Paul Bowman, is going to say. I've known Paul for decades and knew him as a person who was interested in the story of Native people here in the area. He'd researched and written and published on that topic, spent a lot of time up in the same areas of Deer Creek and Mill Creek that I had loved to run around in as an earlier person there, a young man. And so I've known Paul, and he is going to again present on our beautiful Chinese temple. And so just a little touch on Paul himself. Not born here in Butte County, but grew up in Paradise from his infancy. Has had a lifelong interest in our human story in all of its facets there. Went to CHICO'S State and got a bachelor's degree in anthropology, I think in the 1970s. And was immediately, I think, hired on as a curator there at the new Merced County Museum in Merced County and the city of Merced, where they were taking over the beautiful old city building. And now the city, I think, had expanded and built a new complex for the government, and the older building was going to become a county museum. So I've seen pictures that Paul had there about that. So he was there in position there for a number of years there. And there, in their museum, they had a similar, another Chinese temple from that area. And so Paul helped to put that into place, and it was there really that he first became interested in these Chinese temples here in California and what they were all about, and the kinds of imagery and symbolism, the construction, the wood. And so again, I think it is about my point here to stop blabbing and turn it over to Paul, who's really going to tell us the story this afternoon. So, Paul Bowman.
Thank you, Dave. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'd like to begin my presentation with a little bit of a disclaimer, or maybe you could call it a qualifier. I'm going to be talking about the Chinese, and it's wrong to generalize about the Chinese. China is a huge nation. It used to be an empire. It is a nation of different cultures, peoples with different traditions, different customs, different languages, different dialects, different histories, different worldviews. It's wrong to generalize about the Chinese. They are simply too diverse. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to generalize. It's simply too cumbersome to do otherwise. You know, if this was a 2-semester course in Chinese art history, it'd be a little different, but it's not. And we only have an hour, and we have a lot of material to cover, so let's start. China began as a collection of small kingdoms in northern part of China. They were united into one empire in 221 BC. A leader by the name of Qin Shi Huangdi proclaimed himself the first emperor of China. Qin Shi Huangdi is best remembered as the emperor who ordered the construction of the Great Wall. The Empire of China lasted from 221 BC to 1912 AD. In 1912, the last emperor of China, a 6-year-old boy by the name of Puyi, was forced to abdicate. After Puyi's abdication, Sun Yat-sen initiated the Republic of China. The Republic of China lasted until 1949, when Mao Zedong initiated the People's Republic of China. Now, Chinese began to come to California in 1849. They were looking for gold. After the gold rush ended in 1854, they continued to come to California. They were seeking employment. A lot of them found work in agriculture. Some of them went to work on railroads. Some of them went into irrigation. They drained swamps, dug canals, rip-rapped dams. Some of them went into business. Some of them began restaurants, laundries, apothecary shops. Some of them became labor contractors. They supplied Chinese workers to wherever they were needed. The Chinese did whatever they could, and they made a significant contribution to the development of our state. Now, most of the Chinese who came to California came from southern China, particularly from the province of Guangdong. Now, this is a copy of a map of China that dates to 1892. Now, I know you can't see it from where you're sitting, so I'm going to hand it around. But you can clearly see the province of Guangdong and the provincial capital of Canton. Most of the Chinese who came from Guangdong province came either from the city of Canton or from the greater Canton area. Canton was an interesting city. It was a walled city surrounded by a moat. And it was at the mouth of the Pearl River, which emptied into the Pearl River Delta, which opened into the China Sea. It was an international seaport. And it was noted for its very narrow streets, which were called hutongs. I have here a picture of a hutong, and I'll pass this around too. The Pearl River Delta was important to the economy of Canton. On the east side of the delta, the land was given over to rice paddies. On the west side of the delta, they cultivated mulberry shrubs. The mulberry shrubs were grown for their leaves, which provided feed for silkworms. The delta itself was fished. They used drag nets. They also harvested shrimp and mussels. Now, I'm telling you all this to give you an idea of what the Chinese left behind when they came to California. So I have a few more pictures that I'll pass around. Now, the Chinese that came to Chico were interesting in that they arranged themselves into 3 different Chinatowns. That's an unusual thing. Most communities in California had one Chinatown. Chico had 3. There was Old Chinatown, which was located on Flume Street between 5th and 6th Streets. It was formed around 1865. There was New Chinatown, which was located on Cherry Street between 7th and 8th Streets. And then there was the 3rd Chinatown on Humboldt Avenue. Very little is known about the Humboldt Avenue Chinatown. One early Chico bicyclist recalled that every time he pedaled past the Humboldt Avenue Chinatown, he could smell cooked cabbage. Okay. Chico's Chinese temple was located in New Chinatown. It was a 1-story, 2-room structure made of brick. It stood until about 1940 when the city tore it down. It was in a bad state of repair, and most of the Chinese by that time had left that part of Chico. The Chinese that came from southern China to California practiced what's known as a folk religion. It was a combination of Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. And this Taoist, Buddhist, Confucianist religious structure was transposed on an earlier religious structure which included ancestor worship. So let's talk a little bit about the furnishings that we see here in front of us. The furnishings of Chico's temple were more or less typical of what one would see in a Chinese temple in California, but Chico's temple furnishings we're fortunate in that they're more beautiful than one would typically see in most of the other temples in China. There's the main altar right here. There's the secondary altar over there. The secondary altar in the temple would have been positioned in front of the main altar, but for convenience of viewing, we've placed it over there. And then there's the shrine behind the main altar. The shrine is composed of 3 more or less concentric frames, arranged one behind the other. Now, what is a shrine? That's not a word that we hear very often in the West. So I'll offer you a definition. A shrine is a specialized structure which serves to enclose one or more objects of veneration. All right. Now, in most of the temples that one would see in California, you would enter the temple and you would find idols, or what you might call statuettes, made of wood and paper mache, which represented the gods that were worshipped in that particular temple. For whatever reason, Chico's Chinese elected to use what are called name tablets rather than idols. A name tablet is a freestanding wooden tablet inscribed with the name of a deity. On the secondary altar, we have 2 name tablets. One for a god named Chao Kung-ming. Another one which is simply identified as an annual deity. In the shrine, we have 3 name tablets. One for Kuan Yin, the goddess of mercy. One for Kuan Lung, the god of war and peace. And then the last one for Hua Tu, god of medicine and surgery. Let's talk a little bit about Quan Lung. Quan Lung was a real person, a great military leader, noted for his courage and loyalty. During a rebellion in 217 AD, he was captured and beheaded. He became a cult figure, and legends arose, including one about a great oath of brotherhood he took under a peach tree. In 1594, the Emperor of China named Quan Lung a god. He became the god of war and peace, as well as the god of wealth, a god of literature, and he was also the guardian of Buddhist temples. All right, let's talk a little bit about the woods that went into the manufacture of our two altars in our shrine. Now, like the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, the Chinese were keen observers of nature. They wanted to know what useful secrets might lay hidden in the natural world. This inquiry was spearheaded by Taoist alchemists. These alchemists sought to discover a formula for an elixir of immortality. This was one of their main concerns. To this day, if you go to China and you meet Taoists, they'll talk about longevity and they'll talk about immortality. Along the way, these Taoist alchemists found the formula for porcelain. They also found the formula for gunpowder. I don't think they ever did anything about achieving immortality, but they did have some, fortunate outcomes. China's herbalists conducted parallel research. Today, China has the most advanced herbal pharmacology in the world. Chinese investigated the properties of various woods and with interesting results. Now, China has a problem with wood-boring white ants. This has been a long-standing problem for the Chinese. A variety of pine was discovered which repels ants. The beams and joists of houses were made of this particular pine wood. It was found that scrolls and furs were best preserved in chests made of camphor wood. Coffins were made of evergreen oak, which does not easily decay. The wood of the lamu tree was also used in coffins, as it prevents decay of the corpse. Now, the Chinese also learned about teak. Teak is native to the Indian Peninsula, Burma, Siam, the Philippine Islands, Java, and other portions of the Malay archipelago. Teak is an oily wood. It preserves the nails and fastenings which are attached to it. It is aromatic and repulses insects. Teak is durable. It does not split, crack, shrink, or alter its state. There are beams of teak found in structures in India and Burma, which are believed to be 1,000 years old. Let's talk a little bit about how teak is harvested. Burma was noted for its teak plantations and for the export of teak. In Burma, a teak tree was allowed to mature and was then girded. Girding involves a circular cut which severs a tree's bark and sapwood. The teak tree would die and was left standing 1 to 2 years, which allowed the tree's marketable heartwood to season. The tree was then cut down, trimmed, and its trunk cut into logs, which were floated down rivers to sawmills. Some of the wood that went into the crafting of our main altar appears to be teak. I've had to look at some of the worn places on our items here, and sure enough, some of it does look like teak. Now, one of the interesting things about teak and about sawmills in the 19th century, and even in the early 20th century, was the role played by elephants. Elephants were the original forklifts. Yes. In 1881, David Kalakaua, king of the Hawaiian Islands, became the first monarch to circumnavigate the globe. A member of Kalakaua's cabinet, a gentleman by the name of William Armstrong, accompanied the king. Armstrong wrote a book about the trip which he titled Around the World with a King. In this work, Armstrong relates how, in Malaysia, he gained insight into the employment of elephants in the Asian lumber industry. So I'm going to read you a page from his book. As we steamed into the harbor of Malamang for a brief stay, we noticed sawmills on the riverbank and elephants moving the lumber. Here was an opportunity to verify the stories of our childhood's geographies. Did the elephant do intelligent work? We asked the captain to send no notice of the king's presence to the British magistrate, so that our brief time might be given to the study of animal intelligence. We quietly landed on the riverbank and went to the sawmills, where in a most unregal fashion we sat on a pile of lumber and watched the elephants in the lumber yard. Upon a working elephant is a saddle occupied by his keeper and driver, who handles a short iron prod. The traces of the harness are heavy chains. With them the elephant draws a log to the platform of the mill. He then turns tusks under one end of it and raises it to the platform. Turning to the other end, he lifts it to its place, using his trunk to prevent it slipping. If the log is not in a correct position, he apparently notes the error, stoops down, places his head or tusks against it, and moves it into its proper place. After the log is sawn, he takes up the slabs with his tusks and, holding them down with his trunk as if it were a finger, carries them to a rubbish heap. The sawn lumber or boards he places side by side until he has a load. Under it he places his tusks and takes it to a pile where he deposits it and squares it into place. He apparently runs his eye over it, and if it is not straight, he adjusts it. This execution of his task apparently shows extraordinary intelligence. But he is always under the direction of his driver, who sits behind his ears and freely uses his prod. The action of the driver may therefore be the real source of the animal's intelligence. All right. There's one other wood that we need to consider, and it's called zaitan. Zaitan is a very beautiful, very hard wood which varies in color from reddish brown to purplish black. In China, zaitan became and remains the favored wood for the crafting of fine furnishings. Zaitan grows in India, the Philippines, the Malay Peninsula, and the Chinese province of Guangdong. China experienced problems with deforestation and erosion. Stripped of trees, entire hills washed away. Centuries ago, China began to import wood including large amounts of zaitan. The center scene of our main altar may well be carved from zaitan. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the finishes that went on the wood surfaces of our altars and shrine. Generally speaking, in order for wood to last, it must be painted, varnished, or lacquered. The Chinese discovered the lacquer tree, a tree which grows in the eastern and southern portions of China. Sap of the lacquer tree becomes white and opaque when it comes in contact with air. It hardens when dry. This became their lacquer. The sap of the lacquer tree was tapped, much in the way we tap maple trees, and the sap was mixed with various pigments to produce differently colored lacquers. If you wanted a black lacquer, you added powdered carbon. If you wanted yellow, you used ochre or antimony. A brilliant red could be had by mixing it with cinnabar. Green, oxide of copper. Blue, oxide of cobalt. And gold. There was a gold lacquer. How did they make gold lacquer? They added finely ground gold. And this is very evident in our temple. This is one of the things that makes it so beautiful, is the gold lacquer finish on so much of it. The use of gold lacquer in CHICO'S temple is unmistakable. The purplish lacquer, given the main altar and shrine, gives them the appearance of zaitan. Okay, so now we're ready to move into a discussion of the different symbols and motifs that have been carved into our altars and shrine. Something you need to understand, though, is that the art of China was very stylized. Many images are difficult to identify because the Chinese often produced composite imagery. Examples would be a bat given butterfly wings, or a lotus provided with peony petals. Sometimes you really aren't sure just what you're looking at when you're looking at some of the symbols and motifs that you see in Chinese art. So let's begin with the Choi Moon. The Choi Moon is the elaborately carved and lacquered plaque-like device you see hanging on the wall there. Originally, the Choi Moon would have been suspended from the temple's ceiling, and it would have hung in front of the main altar and shrine. Its purpose was to deflect evil influences which might come near the shrine and altar. On the lower panel, you see some figures. Looks like they're playing. Those are the 8 immortals. Those were people who, by one way or another, had become immortal, and they lived together, traveled together. Above the 8 immortals, you see a jousting scene. There are 2 jousters mounted on horses, and they are jousting in front of a royal audience that's under the canopy. The jouster on the left is a male, the jouster on the right is a female. They're both very good. They begin to compliment one another. And after a bit, the man on the left realizes that his opponent is a woman. They fall in love, they get married, and they live happily ever after. All right. Boom, there. All right, so let's talk about the secondary altar below the Choi Moon. One of the most interesting things about the items that are located on the top of the altar is the wine ewer on the left. It has what's called a longevity symbol embossed on the side of it. Looks like this. Also, on the wine ewer, at the bottom of the handle, there is a pendant in the form of what's known as a fish dragon. Looks something like this. Let's talk a little bit about a fish dragon. A carp, when it ascends a waterfall, or when a sturgeon passes through rapids on the Yellow River, it becomes a fish dragon. The fish dragon is a symbol of passing exams with distinction and a symbol of literary eminence. It was a symbol that was particularly appreciated by students who were studying for the imperial exams. The imperial exams were a set of tests which, upon completion successfully, gave one the title of Mandarin and qualified one for a management position in China's civil service. The exams were extremely difficult. People took years of their lives to study for the exams. Coming to an examination hall, people were generally 30 or 35 years of age. Rather late to be starting a new career, but that's how long it took to study for these exams. Sometimes the odds against passing the exams were as high as 3,000 to 1. But if you did pass, you did make it to Mandarin status, your fortune was pretty well assured. One of the symbols we see on the front of the secondary altar is the lotus. Looks something like this. The lotus is linked to human consciousness. It grows upward from mud, through water, and emerges into daylight. The many seeds in the lotus pod make it an emblem of offspring. Another symbol we find on the altar is the coin. Looks something like this. Square within and round without, the coin represents internal rectitude and external suavity and accommodation. Suavity and accommodation. Okay. What looked like Mickey Mouse ears here. Okay. That represents a red ribbon with its tails down here that was sometimes wrapped around a coin. The ribbon represents the aura that is sometimes observed around special objects. Bees. The image on the altar looks something like this. The bee, not surprisingly, is an emblem of industry and thrift. It is said that Ho Sin Wing, a Taoist wizard, blew out a mouthful of rice, which came out as bees. He called them back, and they returned to his mouth and turned back into rice. The bee seen here may actually be a composite image, part bee and part cicada. The grasshopper-like cicada has a 17-year life cycle, from underground larva to mobile pupa to a mature adult. It is a symbol of immortality and reincarnation. Bats. The bat is an emblem of happiness and longevity. According to legend, bats found in the hills may be 1,000 years old and white as silver. It was said that they fed on stalactites. Butterflies. I didn't make a butterfly image, but they're recognizable. Butterflies are symbols of joy, summer, and conjugal felicity. Okay, let's move to the main altar. You see here the central panel. It includes a scene of the 8 immortals in their palace in paradise. To the left, you see a pine tree. Looks something like this. The pine tree is an evergreen, so it is an emblem of longevity. Neither the pine nor the cypress weather in winter, so they are symbols of friends who remain constant in adversity. Now, very often a pine tree is shown with a crane. In this example, the crane is absent. But it does appear elsewhere in the shrine. Looks something like this. The crane is a symbol of longevity. The crane was said to live to a fabulous age. At 600 years, it no longer eats, but still drinks. And humans, it was believed, could turn into cranes. On the left is a willow tree. I'm sorry, on the right. On the right of the main altar is a willow tree. It is a Buddhist symbol of meekness. Chinese women trim their eyebrows to resemble willow leaves. Women's bound feet produced an unsteady stride considered attractive because it resembled the motion of a swaying willow. On the top of the main altar, in the center, you see an incense burner. On the top of the incense burner, you can see a little red lion. We have another lion down here. He has feathers for a tail, and he's apparently being harassed by a bird in a tree. He's looking up at the bird, and he's kind of growling. It looks like he's growling at the bird. The bird looks like he's squawking at the lion. I had a similar situation with my cat at home. There was a blue jay that every day would come and harass my cat, and it would just lay there and look at it. I'd say, "Get him, eat him." He'd just look at me like, "What are you talking about?" So I went out there in the backyard one day, and here's a big pile of blue jay feathers. So I know he finally took my advice and made a meal out of him. I think the lion's thinking the same thing. So, the lion. The lion is an emblem of valor and energy, which are the indispensable components of wisdom. Okay, so now let's move up into the frames of the shrine. We find the lychee nut, or the lychee fruit, I should say. Looks something like this. The lychee tree is native to southern China. It bears what has been the favorite fruit of the Cantonese since ancient times. Colored red, the fruit represents happiness. It also symbolizes romance, beauty, and good luck. Bamboo. Because it is evergreen and its wood is highly durable, bamboo is an emblem of longevity. Pomegranate. The pomegranate represents the essence of favorable influences. A partially peeled pomegranate, always trip over that word. A partially peeled pomegranate resembles a toothy grin. We have an unidentifiable, or what's presently an unidentifiable flower that's in the shrine. If I'm not mistaken, it's another composite image. It's a cross between a lotus and an opium poppy. A similar flower I've found on a door frame from Bali, finished with gold lacquer just like ours, but the leaves are dead ringers for the leaf pattern seen on opium poppies. So, bears further research. Let's talk about clouds. Different cloud types. Clouds are found in the fretwork of the shrine. They serve to create a celestial impression. You'll see cloud motifs. You'll also see the coin motif in the fretwork. The basket. Lan Sai-ho, one of the 8 immortals, carries a basket, and she is patroness of all gardeners. The phoenix. The phoenix, also seen on the Choi moon, is a symbol of everlasting love, beauty, and longevity. It appears only in times of peace and prosperity. Eating the egg of a phoenix brings about eternal life. The image, the phoenix, is another composite. It comes from a cross of the pheasant and the peacock. Very often visitors to the museum say, oh, a peacock. No. Phoenix. The dragon, my favorite symbol. Another composite image, possibly the ultimate composite image. A benevolent creature and producer of fertilizing rain. The dragon can be seen small as a silkworm, or it can expand to something as large as the universe and can change its shape at will. The dragon has the head of a camel, rabbit eyes, deer horns, cow ears, snake neck, frog belly, carp scales, bird claws, and palms of a tiger. Its back has 81 dorsal fins. All right, we're going to conclude with a little bit about a missing symbol. In 1644, Manchurians invaded China, overthrew the Ming dynasty, and established their own regime, known as the Qing dynasty. The ethnic Chinese resented these Manchu overlords. Underground resistance societies arose. These organizations were especially strong in southern China. The city of Canton was known as the City of Revolution. The motto of the revolutionists was, "Down with the Qing, restore the Ming." Even in California, jeweled swords would be placed on temple altars. To the Chinese, the sword was the mother of all weapons. But to the revolutionary Chinese, the jeweled sword was a secret symbol, a symbol of the means by which the Manchus were to be defeated. Our temple had a jeweled sword. It's on George Orberg's inventory when he collected the temple furnishings in 1939. It's appeared on other inventories, but now it's missing. Yeah, is something I'd like to know more about. It's my understanding from a recent conversation with a lady here in Chico that she has a photograph of, I think she said, 2 jeweled swords. So there's more to the story to come. So that's it. Are there any questions? Yes.
Where do you think these were built?
They were built in China, in wood shops in Canton and Hong Kong. That was typical of the furnishings that we would see in Chinatown, temples, wherever they were in the world. The Chinese would manufacture these things, and they were put together in a way that made them easy to disassemble, crate, and ship to wherever they were wanted, and then reassembled and put in place. James?
Do I understand it's all hand carved?
It's all hand carved. Many of the tools that would have been in use in the 19th century are the same kinds of hand tools that wood carvers use today. Yes.
You mentioned about somebody coming into possession of these about 1939 or so.
Yes.
How did
that happen?
get them?
All right. The gentleman in question was named George Orberg. As a boy, Orberg grew up here in Chico, and he used to play in New Chinatown. So the Chinese knew him. He was an adult, and by 1939, there were only 3 Chinese still living in New Chinatown. The temple was going to be taken by the city for back taxes. The Chinese hadn't been paying taxes on the temple structure, the lot. So they needed to empty the building. George Orberg, if he would take the collection, and he agreed to do so. He emptied the building and stored the bulk of the collection in his sister's barn. It moved around sometimes. There were multiple places where the collection was kept, but that's how he got it, and the story is really quite long, how it eventually got here. But were it not for Orberg, the items probably would have just been hauled to the dump. All right. Yes.
I wouldn't have thought the Chinese here would have any resources to have this, to buy this and have it shipped over here. Do they, maybe in China, just give it to them?
No. Although the Emperor of China sometimes took an interest in overseas Chinese and would help finance temple items, the Chinese, to my understanding, would just scrape up the money through donations, and over a period of time would finally have enough to make contacts in China and order a temple crafted and like I said, shipped over to where it was needed. All right, yes.
How did the Chinese use these altars and temples? Did they go in there and worship the symbols on there?
Okay, let me explain what a worship was like in a Chinese temple. It didn't involve a congregation and a sermon. Usually a worshiper would come to the temple on their own. The first thing a worshiper would do is he or she would beat the drum and strike the gong. This was to announce their presence to the deities. And then the worshiper would leave an offering of wine or food on one of the altars and pray in front of one of the idols, or in Chico, one of the name tablets. The worshiper had a problem that he or she couldn't figure out. Something was, one of those things you just couldn't make up your mind. You know, should I marry the girl next door? Should I sell the farm? Should I go to California and look for gold? You know, you just think about it, can't make up your mind, so you decide that you need some divine guidance. So that's why you came to the temple. The temple caretaker would appear. You'd say, I want to help, I need some help with this problem. The caretaker would take the canister that you see on the secondary altar. It's full of bamboo slips, each of which is numbered. The caretaker would shake the canister until one of the slips began to fall out. They would take that, read the number, and look that number up in a book of divinations. The divination that corresponded to that number would be the answer the deities provided to you to help you solve the problem. And that was it. You were free to leave after that. Yes?
We used to have a Chinese oven in the cemetery
Yes.
that they cook offerings or something. You know anything about that?
They have one of those in Orville, and I think they were rather common. But just exactly how they were used, I can't really say. I've seen what you're talking about, though. The general.
What does the writing on these boards say?
Oh boy. Why don't you come up and we'll talk about all that after the program. Yes.
When they would, when the people of Chico, or the Chinese of Chico would order one of this temple from China, was it customized at all, or was it sort of a generalized temple? There's so much symbolism, and I would think that they would want some particular.
I believe it was customized to a degree. Like I said, it's pretty well standard, but they, I think, would write and give the people who were crafting them some instructions about what kind of motifs they wanted, what kind of inscriptions they might want to have had included. The lady in the back row. Here, get this thing out of my...
Both men and women use the shrine?
Yes. But most of the Chinese who came overseas to California and elsewhere were men. The idea was to come to California, make some money, and go back to China. So the wives usually stayed home. It was also the woman's role to stay home and to perform ancestor worship, which was considered very important to the family's well-being. So they had a reason to be left behind in that respect. Richard.
Have you discerned some special attributes about this altar, that is unique to Chico? In other words, you'd have to come here to see this unusual attribute?
No, not really, Richard, no. No, I can't really. I'd like to say yes, but I just can't think of anything. Yes.
So is there a record of similar temples in the old Chinatown and the Humboldt Road one?
All right.
Or is this the only one?
There are indications that in old Chinatown there was a temple, a small one that was kept upstairs in a building, possibly above a restaurant. That was very typical of Chinatowns. Restaurants on the second floor of some structure. You know, it would be part of maybe a family meeting association hall or something like that, where they would have a small temple that the rest of the community could come and use if they so chose. And as I say, that was common. We're not real firm on that. And I might add that the secondary altar was not crafted in China. It was crafted in San Francisco, which makes it rather different. It's crafted of softwood, either fir or pine. I think it's fir. The rest of the, like the main altar, is hardwoods. Possibly a combination, like I said before, of Zaitan and teak. Yes?
I, as a child, always heard that the old Chinatown on Flume Street, that building was completely undermined with tunnels and
Everybody who comes to the museum, it must be half the people that come to the museum and look at the temple ask that about the tunnels. All right. Yes, there were tunnels. They were not as elaborate as some people would have you believe. It was common for the Chinese to dig short tunnels that would connect basements. And this was because immigration authorities would pop up every once in a while. And somebody would give the word that, oh, you need to disappear. And so they would go down into the basement of a building that was about to be raided, and then they would escape to another building nearby through these tunnels that connected all the basements in that particular block. So it was an escape mechanism in many instances. Yes, the lady in the back.
Who restored and reassembled the temple, this temple that we're looking at right now, after it had been stored in the barn for so long?
You'd have to talk to Chris and Keith about that. They're the two people who will fill you in on all that. Liz, you have a question.
Well, there was an old Joss in Old Chinatown, and it burnt late April 1912, and it was in the paper that there was a fire
Okay.
on the second floor.
Okay.
So it was on the side of Flume where the Methodist church is.
Uh-huh. All right.
I don't know which building.
Thank you. You can go to Old Chinatown, the site of Old Chinatown, and the two-story building right there on the corner of Fifth and Flume, directly across from the pageant theater, that was a part of Chinatown. It's the only building that I'm aware of that is in Chico that remains from its Chinese community. Yes?
Were candles or incense used in any of the service?
Yes. Very often when a worshiper would come to the temple, he or she would light some incense as an offering rather than some wine or some food. And we have a piece of raw sandalwood that's on the top of the secondary altar that was, you could take your pocket knife, carve shaves of sandalwood off of that, put it in a bowl and light it. That is very rare. Today, the sandalwood incense that you buy is artificial. They don't make sandalwood incense out of sandalwood anymore. The wood is simply too rare. Any more questions? Yes?
What is that material above those two things? It looks like a window or a mirror. And it has blurry things behind it.
Oh, the circular motif?
The long one.
The long one.
Above the two sconces, I guess.
Okay, you'll have to point it out to me after.
Okay, I will.
All right. Any other questions? I was going to conclude with a talk about Neo-Confucianism and the status of Taoism in China today. No, I don't think so. I would like to say that from my own perspective, one of the great importances of this temple is that it is the finest piece of wood carving in Chico, one of the finest pieces of wood carving in the North State. this temple collection belongs in an art museum as much as it belongs in a history museum. And I would encourage anyone who's thinking about getting into wood carving, thinking about getting into cabinetry, high school students are taking a wood shop class, they should come here for inspiration. This is a beautiful temple. And years ago, when this museum first started, it was located in front of the door, and I used to purposely walk by and come in the evening and peek through the door just to look at the temple and enjoy its beauty. So, yes.
How many Chinese do you suspect were in this area at one time, the maximum?
It has been said that there was a maximum of 3,000 Chinese in Chico at one time. If that figure is correct, it probably means that they were here, the majority of those Chinese were here temporarily. They had been hired to perform some kind of construction-related project. I don't think our community, the Old Chinatown, New Chinatown, and Humboldt Avenue, I don't think they typically added up to any more than 1,000 at the most. That would be my estimation from what I've been able to read so far. Yes, Susie. Today, none of the old families are here. What is the Chinese population of Chico today? I don't know. Rather small, but I don't have a figure for what it is. But like I say, none of the old families remain in the area.
The Chinese have always been invisible in this town as long as I can remember. Never seen one anywhere.
I used to hear the same thing in Merced. There was one gentleman who told me how he went to school with a Chinese girl, met her in kindergarten, knew her all the way through high school, and after graduation he never saw her again. They are a people who kept to themselves, and a people who have done a lot for us. Think of all the things that China has done for us in terms of cuisine, in terms of medicine, in terms of exercise and martial arts, and art in general. Think about it. The Pacific Rim wouldn't be like it is today if it were not for the inventiveness and the imagination of the Chinese. Yes, Richard?
And then we have the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yes, the Exclusion Act. Of a case study in discrimination. That wasn't repealed until I believe it was 1942, when China became an ally of the United States during the Second World War. Yes, the Exclusion Act made it very difficult for Chinese to leave California and return, or for any Chinese to immigrate to the United States.
A side light, my father had some kind of an infection on his ankle that just kept being bad. He went to a Chinese doctor out where Indian Village was back in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
They had a Chinese doctor here at that time.
Really? Yeah, there was a herbal physician in New Chinatown. I think that his name was Dr. Wing, if I remember correctly. He advertised that he had attended medical schools in Canton, Hong Kong, and Peking. I think there were a couple other herbalist physicians over time that resided in Chico. Yes, Richard? Yes, Richard?
What a wonderful gift you've given Chico.
Yes.
Today.
Well, thank you.